Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Adapting to Financial Services Disruption Today, Tomorrow, and Beyond. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Virginia Lee Williams, Vice President at Spigit.
Thank you, Hannah. And to our audience as well as our panelists, thanks so much for making us part of your day today. We're looking forward to a very interesting discussion during the hour that we've got together. I have the privilege of being part of the Spigit team, helping our clients, including those on our panel today, leverage the Spigit solution to engage their employees and help drive real and positive impact for their businesses. So before I introduce our distinguished panel, I'd like to speak very briefly about Spigit. Spigit is an enterprise-class ideation management solution, and we enable organizations to leverage the power of the crowd to create and manage a pipeline of ideas around which the crowd can engage and collaborate and help drive positive outcomes for our client companies. These ideas can drive initiatives such as new business strategies, product development, operational efficiencies, and importantly, employee engagement. By partnering with Spigit, business leaders find the best ideas to help them make the right decisions and foster a culture of innovation, all of which we're here to talk about today. We are the largest provider of ideation management software to some of the world's foremost companies. Next slide, please, Hannah. We power ideation for large enterprises across major industries, many of whom their names and their logos you will recognize. These include manufacturing, healthcare, energy, and notably financial services. Worth over $2.1 trillion, our banking and insurance companies are also some of the most active Spigit users. Additionally, most of the leading global consultancies and systems integrators choose Spigit as their innovation partner. And they leverage Spigit not only internally, but also with their clients to ideate and innovate. And as you can see, Spigit has over 6 million users in 150 countries. We're counting over 14,000 challenges and 100,000 winning ideas, and that is, of course, increasing every day. There's no doubt that major change is underway in the financial services industry, from entirely online banks with no branch presence at all to fintech offerings like peer-to-peer payments and mobile payments that are changing the consumer experience. And we're even seeing new forms of currency like Bitcoin. Innovation is now business critical, not only for financial service companies, but also in the many industries that you see reflected on this slide, and many of whom are reflected in our audience today. So today we've gathered leaders from 4 financial service companies to share their experiences. I'd like to introduce our 4 panelists and then ask each of them to share with you a brief introduction of their program, and then we'll dive into our discussion. I'd like to welcome Kevin McMahon from Genworth Mortgage Insurance, Rebecca Cameron of NASDAQ, Catherine Curtin of Moody Analytics, and Kellen Bell of Capital One. Welcome and thanks for being with us here today. And Kevin, how about if we start with you? Tell us a little bit about your program.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Virginia. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin McMahon. I am a lead strategy and capital markets here at Genworth Mortgage Insurance in Raleigh, North Carolina. We engaged with Spigit probably 18 months or so ago and have implemented the program now at a couple of different businesses at Genworth. It was really focused on driving innovation at the business, and I look forward to telling you guys more about it.
Great, thank you. Rebecca, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Yes, so I am a Vice President of Corporate Strategy for NASDAQ, and for the last 5 years or so, I have been focused on organic growth initiatives for the organization, and that naturally led to fostering a culture of innovation to spur those new ideas. So we've been engaging with Spigit for probably 18 months, 24 months time frame, and I'll say that we lived by our framework methodology of experimentation. So we are actively engaging now on a company-wide use of the Spigit platform that we've actually titled The Possibilities Engine. So happy to talk about that more today.
Love the name. Thank you, Rebecca. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you, Virginia. Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Curtin. I'm an Associate Director for Strategy and Innovation at Moody's Analytics in New York City. Within Moody's, I work in our firm's emerging business unit, which is the innovation engine, and I lead our internal efforts to foster and drive a culture of innovation across Moody's Analytics. So within my role, it includes the planning of internal and external knowledge sharing, client events, our communication strategy, and of course, our innovation challenges, which I'm very much looking to share some of our learnings and experiences today.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Kellen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Kellen Ball. I am a culture change agent and operations guru within the Capital One Labs. The labs were founded in 2011 as part of Capital One, and we are organizationally aligned to the digital and tech organizations. We began using Spigit over the summer and really started as a pilot, and looking forward to sharing some of the findings that we had, not only in the summer, but as our program continues to evolve.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. And with that foundation, let's go ahead and dive in. I'd like to begin talking a little bit of what's been happening outside the four walls of your company in the external environment. And if you could, I'd like to hear what are some of the business or industry challenges that you were facing that drove your program in the first place. And Catherine, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think, at the middle end of 2016, the senior leadership within Moody's Analytics realized that we had a lot of innovation efforts happening all across the firm in our different product development teams, even in our operations teams, but they really felt the need to centralize. And so that led to the creation at the end of 2016 of the Emerging Business Unit. And when the unit was being formed, they really agreed on two key goals that we would have as our mandate. And the first is, of course, developing new products, evaluating new technology, and making sure that we're really using our discovery-driven development to inform how we're investing and moving forward on the product side. The other key goal that they established with the unit was driving a culture of innovation across the firm, because I think there was an acknowledgement that in order to be successful in the product development piece and enable to drive our initiatives across the organization, we needed to better engage our employees with us in the innovation process and ensure that we were taking our organization, our engineers, our developers along this journey with us. And so I think that is kind of, was an interesting way to respond to the challenge. And of course, it's huge for us to think about how are we engaging and utilizing all the information and knowledge that our employees have to drive our business decisions.
Catherine, were there dynamics in the industry in general that were driving this, or was this mostly an internal recognition around employee engagement and innovation?
I think it was both. I think, you definitely saw, we saw things kind of happening in pockets. They were a little disparate. You had firms looking at evaluating the same thing at the same time without talking to each other. But I also think, it was something that we started realizing in most client meetings that we were having or prospecting meetings, this was a key thing people wanted to know about. What was our innovation strategy? And it's become something now that, I think customers expect. And so for us, it was, how do we make sure that we're aligned in our message of innovation, and how we make sure that not only our employees, but our customers are aware and with us in our innovation process as well.
Got it. Kevin, how about at Genworth? What were you seeing in the industry that was sort of driving your program?
Sure, Virginia. So I'll take you back a bit further to the housing crisis. So at Genworth, we insure low down payment mortgages. So as you can imagine, a tough time for us was coming through the housing crisis, and capital at that point was dedicated to paying claims. It wasn't dedicated to coming up with the next new thing for growth. It was more about, quite frankly, surviving the housing crisis and living to fight another day. And then coming out of the housing crisis, we were focused on growth, but we recognized that the growth muscle of our associates had withered away, if you will. They weren't by default thinking of new things and innovating. So we had to do something to spur that. We had to give it a shot in the arm for a cultural shift, and we had to be very deliberate in driving an innovation focus, because we are firmly focused on growth as an organization now. So Spigit played a significant role in that, and I'll tell you, it really was a message to our associates that we're serious about this, that we're bringing in this leading technology platform that's going to help us get smarter about how we do innovation. That this innovation message that we're preaching to the associates wasn't the thing of the year that's going to go away quickly. So the Spigit program obviously helped us with the nuts and bolts of implementing an innovation platform, but it also helped us with the messaging to our associates that this is truly a cultural shift that we were serious about.
Excellent. I think you're taking us to the next real question I have, which is we talked a little bit, as you noted here, some of the business and industry challenges, and that leads then to what are some of the the internal business goals that were driving the program. And we talked at the start of the webinar here, whether it's operational efficiency, new revenue opportunities, product development, etc. So if I could, Rebecca, I'm going to toss this one to you. You mentioned in your introduction, and we've heard Kevin talk briefly here about the product development, and you talked about the need for organic R&D growth. Can you tell us more about that and how that relates to your program?
Absolutely. So, we had similar motivations in terms of driving change within the organization, as well as serving our customers, that really led us to partner with Spigit. And really what we're trying to be on the proactive approach. We have wonderful senior leadership sponsorship to drive change and have impact. And we have a great framework internally that we've been messaging strong all year. And really what that's trying to do is be more rapid. So under the leadership of Brad Peterson, our CIO, he has for several years now been a thought leader internally and externally for us about technology trends. And it's really about, now that the technologies are feasible and they're becoming more cost efficient to deploy, how can we make sure that we're building solutions that customers need? So what I really do in my role is help those individuals understand those technologies, think about partnering the technology engineers with the business product folks to make sure that we're building things that customers want and will buy. And so what is a great tool about Spigit is bringing that dialogue to an open and transparent platform, at least internally focused right now. So it's really trying to break down those silo walls, to engage conversation to the key stakeholders at the right time. And also it's giving us an ability to have a little bit of a database and a place to go back to. Because sometimes when you're going through product exploration or even emerging technologies, you find that while it's technologically feasible, the customers aren't ready for it yet, or the customers want a particular solution and you need to figure out what is possible. That's why we call it the possibilities engine. So really sometimes working together can find particular opportunities to move forward with, and then being able to move them quickly through the rest of the operational programs that we have to actually launch new product. So we are not only looking for external customer-facing products. Within our framework, we've actually thought about sustaining innovations as well as disruptive innovations. So this platform enables us to also focus internally about workflow efficiencies, which again ultimately can result in improved customer service and focus.
Got it. So you're actually launching challenges inside the organization across your employees to help determine not only new and perhaps disruptive product development opportunities, but also how to take existing products and services and improve them?
Absolutely. So that's one of the great, wonderful observations and aha moments of the experimentation that we had last year with the platform that moved us into adoption. We actually had our finance organization sponsor a challenge and look at workflow efficiencies and look at ways to apply technology such as robotics into creating process improvements. So it really is a holistic approach, not exclusive to external-facing product and development, which I think is a win-win because it really does engage all employees, that it's not, oh, I don't know that technology, or I'm not customer-facing. It really does say, I'm here. How can I chime in, learn more, and potentially have an idea that is adopted within the organization?
Love it. Kellen, talk to us a little bit about Capital One and what some of the business goals are there for your program, and share with us how your organization is thinking about this.
Sure. So actually, I'll tie it back to, in your intro, you mentioned how innovation is becoming business critical. And as Capital One Labs, we certainly recognize that. And so one of the key changes in the labs that led to the use of Spigit was in April, we recognized the need to introduce both new and existing ideas to essentially the leadership team, and they would decision which one of those projects would be moving forward. And in light of that, there was a need to better highlight what new ideas could be worked on across the labs. We have 3 geographies that we are in, so with those 3 distinct geographies, it was commonly difficult to find critical mass on some of the newer and emerging technologies. Yet with Spigit, when teams would enter in their ideas, as mentioned by some of the previous panelists, the transparency that's created by Spigit allowed them to essentially find one another and then start to deliver new ideas that were ultimately pitched to leadership. I think in terms of how Spigit aligns with our objectives within the labs are to identify new ideas that could be H2 or H3 ideas with a time frame of delivery for 1 to 2 years out. And when you're thinking about timeframes that are a little farther out, having a way to collaborate across geographies and with different disciplines, including outside of the labs and beyond, enabled us to actually present a series of ideas that were then funded by the leadership team.
Excellent, excellent. What was the key component there for you, Kellen, in being able to communicate across all of those geographies and all of those, I guess some people have used the word silos before. What's worked for you in being able to do that effectively and efficiently?
So I think one of the things that that worked really well was a recognition of how does our organization already communicate, and how can we tie kind of the unique aspects of Capital One into the launch of this program. And one of those things is at Capital One, we're a highly collaborative culture. And so in recognition of that, a digital platform by itself poses some risk that people will not engage. And so we actually created some in-person activities that enabled people to kind of come together, learn about the platform, but more importantly, talk about the new technologies or the ideas that were somewhat far-flung, where they might not have the confidence to enter them into a platform alone. Yet whenever you combine them, and there's we called it like an idea party, and essentially would start to archive some of the ideas that were generated in the platform and allow that to be kind of the starting point as we ultimately aggregated all of the ideas. And so I think one of the things that I would kind of share as a best practice would be to look at how your organization already works and like what are some of the unique facets of that, and then tie that directly into either how you are intending to either launch a challenge or continue to engage throughout the entire process.
Great advice and a great segue to my next question for all of you. And that speaks to kind of what you're talking about here, Kellen, and how you really get the programs off the ground. And I think this is probably, you know, sort of industry agnostic, if you will, right? These best practices that you all are using can cross all industries, not just financial services. So I'd like to hear, what were your initiatives driven in your companies largely by executive leadership? Was it more of a bottoms-up initiative? And if it was the latter, how did you sell that idea to senior leadership, and how did you build the momentum inside your organization? Kind of a two-part question. And if I could, Rebecca, I'd like to start with you on that one.
Sure. So the good news is that I didn't have to sell it to senior leadership. We had a senior leadership change in the last year with the addition of Adina Freeman as our CEO. We also had a new CFO, Michael Potasnik, and with Brad Peterson, challenging the status quo. So, but that's not to say that it wasn't also a bottoms up, right? These senior leaders were thinking about our strategic direction and where we needed to grow and how we needed to serve our customers, but we also needed to enable employees. And there's a lot of talent and passion in this organization. It's a global organization that's I think over 30 individual locations. So we needed to be able to scale and reach everyone to be effective. So in terms of advice, I think what I was able to do is not only did I have that senior management support, but I continued to show proof points of the momentum that we were able to accomplish. So, first and foremost, I heard someone else as a panelist say that they piloted Spigit. We had a similar concept in the sense that we were engaged with Spigit, but on a very low profile internally, only going to specific senior management next level down sponsors to give them a sense of what the platform capabilities was, what those opportunities to use those guided challenges could produce, and ultimately showing them the employee engagement that they got out of it, the access to ideas and new thinking that the platform enabled. And so that only helps build the response to when it came time to say, are we deploying this as a program component enablement tool? Yes, we are, because it's working, because of these proof points. So I think, when you're looking at, looking to implement something in your program or a tool like Spigit, it is an easily spun up dynamic, but it's really about how you share the wins of the tool that I think really can have a quick impact in helping you be able to scale.
Yes, I love what you're saying about share the wins. We hear that a lot, and that certainly is an important component to a successful program, which I kind of put in the bucket of communicating, right? And I think, Kevin, you touched on this a little bit in our last question. You said Spigit was sort of a message that you all were serious about this and that it wasn't sort of the thing of the year. So in that context, talk to us a little bit more about what that meant in terms of how your initiative was driven, if it came from executive leadership, bottoms up, and how you sort of communicated that message and got people on board.
Yeah, so Virginia, it was driven from the leadership level initially of identifying Spigit and evaluating that as the approach and then making that decision. But then what we did was the execution was led by someone very junior in our organization who just ate it up and really enjoyed taking this and propagating it across the entire organization, thinking through how is it implemented, how is it communicated. So it actually was a nice mix. It definitely had the leadership push, and before we move forward, I made it very clear to my peers that this won't work unless we support it. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that, but that's been complemented nicely with this level of execution that has just made this grassroots feel to the implementation, and that has helped the continued usage, the continued engagement, and has worked out well for us.
You just made a really important point, I think, and we talk a lot about this. It's not only that the program is being supported to allow people to ideate and collaborate, but that your executive leadership is actually going to, I think your words were, do something with this and implement these ideas, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So challenges when we implement them have to be sponsored by someone on the senior leadership team, and that has been crucial in order for us to succeed with a number of the challenges that have produced results for us.
Catherine, if I may ask you, are there any strategies or techniques that you have used to spur employee engagement in your program?
Yep. So we brought Spigit on board in the spring of last year. So I believe April, May is when we started planning our first challenge. And we had made a decision. We kind of gone back and forth, but we made the decision to go across all Moody's Analytics employees. We really wanted to kind of reach everybody, and we designed the challenge in a way where we thought it was, appealing to everybody, kind of to what Rebecca was saying. We asked people to opine on business processes, product ideas, but under the theme of artificial intelligence, so it felt authentic to things that we were already working on internally. And I think for us, that was a key decision point of deciding how to launch this thing and how to educate people about it, and that allowed us to do it across the organization kind of once, like a big bang. And the other thing I think that helped us is how we branded the portal. So we called it for Moody's Analytics, MA. So we called ours Imagine, and came up with a lot of kind of communication strategy and logos around getting people educated and familiar with what is an innovation competition, how can they submit, how could they participate, and really making sure they felt that they could directly engage in the innovation process. And then I think, and this kind of, I think, echoes what Kevin was saying, is it's so important that I think the organization sees what you do with the ideas once you name who the 3 or 5 or however you design your challenge winners are. What happens next? What happened with the business plan? What happened with funding? Is the person who submitted the idea still working on it? So continuing, I think, to tell that story of that POC or process improvement is important, because that gets you momentum into the challenge, into the next challenge. And that's what this is about, is continuing to engage employees and hearing what their ideas are. So I think for us that has been another key part of the success of using Spigit internally.
Yeah, you're right. It goes back to what Kevin was saying. This wasn't just the thing of the year or the activity of the moment, right? It sounds like you all are working to make this part of your cultural fiber, right? It's a business critical piece of how you do what you do, sort of part of your DNA almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. Kellen, I think at Capital One, you've talked about this sort of being driven from a senior leadership standpoint, and specifically, a way for the team's voices to be heard. So tell us more about that.
Sure. So our leader, the head of the Capital One Labs, Steve Straub, he had a vision for Capital One Labs to have an environment where people could collaborate, not just on kind of the new ideas, but also in the future on existing ideas. So as a pilot, we started with this as kind of the new idea platform. And what's interesting is someone earlier had mentioned, so Steve was interested in the community, but the how took a little bit of the selling. And so I think when you look at the ease of implementation of Spigit into an organization, it made a very clear case as to the functionality that we would gain by using something like Spigit was far greater than some of the other tools that we had at our disposal, some of them being kind of the internal tools. And so that was an easy sell. I think what made the program successful throughout the challenge was the continued focus by leadership to continue to comment, to engage some of their peers. And when there were ideas that really had kind of the right ingredients, but maybe they weren't being prepared in the right way, to help shape what those ideas were through not just collaboration on the tool itself, but then also pulling up with the people who submitted that idea. And I think that's an important part of what really made our program a success, was the depth of leadership engagement throughout the entire challenge. And then, as mentioned, the pitch concluding the competition and challenge then enabled people to know what was going to happen with implementation.
Tell us briefly what you mean. Most people probably know, but tell us briefly about the pitch.
Yeah, so the operating model for the lab shifted to more like an accelerator. And so think Shark Tank, where associates within the labs had essentially 3 minutes to share their idea with essentially a crowdfunding. And so they would then have their idea essentially vetted in those 3 minutes. And so what the Spigit allowed them to do was to present their ideas early on and continue to get refined over time, not just through leadership, but also through peers and folks outside of the labs.
Great, great. Catherine, one of the things that you've talked about is the importance of having at least one senior person help you sponsor, and then your words were just dive in and do it, and have a trusted methodology. Talk to us more about what that means in a practical matter.
Yeah, sure. So I think we were talking about, you know, if you were to give advice to someone who's considering evaluating Spigit, what would you tell them? And I think for us, when we first, you know, decided to move forward with Spigit, a lot of it was, I think we were very cautiously optimistic. We were excited, but there was also that moment of like, what if we build it and they don't come and the ideas don't flow, or you know, you don't have the participation levels that you were targeting. And so I think for us, having the methodology that Spigit provides, having the benchmark data for how many ideas to expect, how many people will log in, how many people will vote, how many people will actually submit ideas, gave us, you know, a sense of how can we measure success in this first challenge. And for us, I think as we were going through it, particularly in the very early, you know, first few weeks the challenge was launched, I mean, we were having those benchmarks was so helpful because it allowed us to know, like, great, we're hitting exactly where we should be hitting. Here's the places where we're actually exceeding what Spigit said we would do. And here's maybe some places where we need some work. You know, here's some, maybe they don't understand the feature, but it allowed us to kind of go back and continue to iterate and educate with the rest of the firm and communicate better. And so I think for us, we definitely had the excitement, we had the senior leadership sponsorship, but also having that piece of Spigit's experience with running these challenges across industries, across different types of firms, really allowed us to kind of measure where we were throughout the challenge, and also gave us, I think, a sense of relief that things were going well or as expected. And it's kind of continued as I've continued to work with our relationship manager in Spigit as we move into different types of challenges, doing awards, doing hackathons, doing some AlwaysOn challenges, which is something new we're going to be launching early next year, is, you know, now we continue to pivot and tweak what our expectations are as people are more and more familiar with what we're trying to do with innovation competitions in Moody's. So my advice is definitely do it, and definitely have faith, I think, in the methodology that Spigit provides, because it's really worked out quite well for us.
Great. Thank you for that, and thank you for the kudos. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You're all great salespeople. Rebecca, anything to add on your front? I know you've talked before about the importance on, you know, focusing on enablement tools and creating value for the organization and being very clear in how you communicate and allow your employees to participate. Anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a different perspective to Catherine's experience. We actually went with the AlwaysOn challenge first in our official deployment. So within the program at NASDAQ, we also have always been, you know, since I've been running it, always soliciting employees and encouraging them to submit ideas. So we had a process or an area called the NASDAQ Idea Room. And it was a manual process for many years, in the sense that I was a bottleneck, in the sense that people identified me with the Idea Room, and we had simple things that we would ask people about their concept or their idea, because really that was the funneling process was so broad. You'd get an email, you'd get a hallway conversation, and so kind of to Kellen's approach, we do have kind of a standard opportunity statement that we ask our idea originators to complete. We've now using categories to help us bucket whether these ideas are performance, disruptive, productivity. And so what I really like there is that we're modernizing the existing with the platform and the possibilities engine. And so that's actually one, making my job a little bit easier, but better yet, you know, really elevating and giving recognition to those idea originators, but also developing and showing themes. A lot of times depending on trends, depending on certain technologies, there might be a particular kind of theme that's emerging across the organization as a potential opportunity. And this now, through this platform, gives our employees, stakeholders, and really kind of experts to be more transparent. Because what I was finding before was I was the person making the network opportunity to introduce so-and-so about this particular emerging technology that you needed to learn more, or this person didn't know that we had already experimented with and made a strategic decision on a particular theme. And so I'm really, really excited that we are already always on and that we have using technology to be able to get better access, transparency, and hopefully, give people that confirmation, even if it's a no, right? So sometimes, people would say, oh, I had an idea and I told my manager, but it never went anywhere. And usually that was just a breakdown in communication. So one of the things that I've been trying to encourage through the organization is it's okay to say no. And we've been very much refreshing and communicating our strategy. So that's also been a big influencer when employees are coming forward. One of the opportunity statement questions is, how does this align to NASDAQ's strategy? So, by just doing a few things that, again, the platform was very intuitive. We could modify our post an idea form to align to our best practices that we had already established. We've been able to help people think about, how do you build a business case? How do you build the rationale so that ideas do find a home or find their thematic or get an answer back? Because sometimes the originator is not good at communicating their concept, and so it dies on the vine because they're not articulating it properly. So I think that's been another value add in terms of our experience with the platform.
Yeah, and you're all talking about your great experience with the platform, but what I really am enjoying hearing here, and I'm sure our audience as well, is it's not just about the technology and the platform, right? In the case of working with Spigit and the great things you all are doing, it's about all the other components that come around that, whether it's the methodology, the communications tools, the incentives, the best practices. And it sounds like you're all leveraging those in meaningful ways, which is great to hear. And in your case, Rebecca, and then we'll move on to the next question, but it sounds like you already had sort of this environment of AlwaysOn, and by deploying a platform like Spigit and the methodology around it, you're now in a great position to scale and to reach more employees and get to those better answers. And I really loved what you said about even if it's a no, because we hear that from a lot of clients, that a no is going to happen, but the most important thing is that you go back and communicate with that employee why it was a no. And our experience shows us that when you do that, that employee is going to be even more engaged, and they're going to give it another shot next time. Are any of you seeing that? Rebecca, I'm assuming that's an important part of the program there.
Absolutely. So I mean, again, the AlwaysOn is something that we're maturing into, but I'm very excited that, yes, I mean, it's been a tough journey for the last 5 years to be that kind of bottleneck, so to speak. But I do think that it's how you deliver the no that is most important. So, it's a fine art form to be supportive and to show that that's an interesting concept. I like your use of the potential technology or your focus on our customers, because sometimes you go through all the business case model and you get all the stakeholders together, and, one of the leaps of faith or the assumptions that they've put in that was never tested. And this is what I really like about the platform, is you can learn faster and earlier in that business case build out that we have a wild assumption in here that we never tested. And you might find out not from internally it's a no, but from our customers. They're not interested, or they're not going to pay a certain price point, or it's not a must-have, it's a nice-to-have. So sometimes just enlightening and broaden people's exposure to the rationale helps them understand that even if it's not a harsh no, sometimes it's not right now. is a great
Correct.
concept, but we have too many barriers to make it a successful product. I think that's a huge, value add in helping us prioritize. Because if we all had unlimited funds, we'd all be chasing every opportunity that we could. But it's really about prioritization as well.
Right, right. Before we move on, I just want to remind the participants, our audience, that you may ask questions of our panel. You can ask your questions in the GoToWebinar question panel, and I will forward those along to our great panel. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk specifically about some things that are happening in your industry. And Kevin, I'd like to send this one to you. And driving digital transformation is a huge topic in the market today. And I'd love it if you could talk about how your program is supporting digital transformation goals.
Sure, yes, that's absolutely a huge topic. We could probably spend the hour at least on that. But I think the thing about digital transformation as it relates to Spigit, how I think about it, is it's really touches a lot, if not all, applications across an enterprise. And it's making sure that the data is accessible and flowing and tracked. At least that's how we think about it here. And the reason I like Spigit in this scenario, the reason it's been helpful, is I think many businesses are at risk of having people like myself go away or go to some fancy offsite and plan a digital transformation for the business. But what Spigit enables you to do is to reach all the way down into the processes of the business and really identify what the issues are, what the opportunities are. And we have just had, it's been really refreshing to see ideas and comments and just engagement from people who typically would not. Just from a human aspect, maybe they're an introvert and they are down doing their job at a certain portion of the organization. But as we are looking holistically to change the organization, we need to understand how it works at the front line, and we need to engage with those people. And that was what Spigit did. And one of my favorite things about Spigit has been the fact that people who typically have not been engaged, just because it's not their style, have found an outlet. They have found a platform where their voice is heard, and they're quite frankly some of our most frequent users.
I personally love that. Does a story come to mind, Kevin, of one of these experiences?
Yeah, I think it's the example I just gave you.
Mm-hmm.
There's an individual in the business that has even used his opportunity to be vocal on Spigit to have an impact on his career. And remember, we've only been doing this for 18 or 20 some odd months, but this individual has used this outlet and put forth probably a dozen ideas, a couple of which have been acted upon, and he's even moved around in the organization to a part of the organization that's more suited for his role, for his skills. So it's a good success story on a personal level that really makes you feel good about just kind of a different impact that our innovation program and Spigit specifically has had.
Yeah, and like you said, and we've seen it with other clients too, and it speaks to also the importance of the diversity of the crowd and taking your challenges out to a broad and wide audience. Our research tells us that that's where you're going to have the best ideas, is the more diverse your crowd is. And I think, Catherine, if I may, I feel like you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you touched on that a little bit when you talked about your holistic approach, and your finance team was running challenges and giving the opportunity for all employees to say, I'm here, I have a voice.
Yeah, I think, it's been interesting because of the way that when we run our time-bound challenges, the way that they're constructed is they almost appeal to different employees at different stages of the challenge, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Because, of course, at the outset, we're very reliant on ideas being submitted that people can comment on, can vote on, can collaborate on. And I think we were really pleased with what we saw out of that group. But it was a concentrated, you had maybe 150, 170 employees submitting ideas out of the 5,000 that we permissioned to the tool. But as we kept going and as we kept educating people on the voting piece, the commenting piece, how do you move ideas forward, and particularly when we decided to use what's called pairwise voting, which I think is a fantastic feature of the platform, we saw our login percentage increase pretty dramatically in that week that we opened it up to the kind of pairwise voting, because you were engaging just a different part of the organization who maybe didn't have a great sense of how to use, the artificial intelligence or RPA or whatever technology we're talking about in our challenges. But they wanted to evaluate the ideas. They wanted to see what people had come up with, and they wanted to vote and opine and have a say in which ideas ended up winning and kind of coming out on top. And so for us, I think that was a huge win in seeing, just at different stages what parts of the organization were logging in and participating. And also on that, kind of along that theme, I think we also saw a lot of collaboration on ideas from different business units, from different offices, from different lines of business, and people really who have never met kind of interacting together and going back and forth on how to improve an idea, or had they thought about this type of machine learning for their idea. And so that was, I think, a very exciting thing to kind of see unfold. So both in, the breadth of reaching as many employees as we can, but also letting employees who have similar interests come together and collaborate and kind of, make the ideas as strong as they can be.
Yeah, and I think, Kellen, you've seen a little bit of that now in the early days at Capital One. You'd mentioned to me before that you started your program in labs, but you were receiving ideas outside of the lab kind of organically. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So as a pilot, we intended for the kind of the scope of the Spigit challenge to be limited to the labs. But what's interesting is, so all of the email blasts were really to the labs distribution list. Yet we also posted a bit on our Slack channel and also on our internal our internal social media. And there are a few people who actually follow those channels because they're really interested in essentially providing ideas that could go into the labs, but then also looking at potential transitions in their own careers over to the labs. And so I think it actually became a almost like a pipeline for people to engage with our group that commonly would not have had the opportunity to do that. And related to that, I want to draw out a point that Rebecca was making earlier with regards to being the point person for engaging other groups. That's actually one of the areas where we saw Spigit drive a lot of value as the ideas were being commented and refined. And that was that we selectively paired some of our risk specialists to certain ideas that sounded like they might not make it through later risk forums. And what we found was the advice that they gave was very specific and helped those teams understand when those ideas would be allowed to pass through and what aspects of those ideas, if they were tweaked or changed, would allow that idea to meet certain levels of regulation or not fall in regulatory risk.
Got it.
So I think those were two parts that I just wanted to kind of bring forward as the earlier conversation kind of really spurred that thought.
Thank you for that. And it's really great to hear how you all are leveraging, as I noted earlier, you're beyond the platform, that you're leveraging sort of the guidance, the advice, the strategic input from the practitioners at Spigit who work closely with you. And that's really, really awesome to hear, because it sounds like it's a key piece that's helping your programs be successful in providing you that guidance and templates and other tools to help you develop the program outside of just using the platform. Does that make sense?
It does. And commonly, the level that the review process, at least for some of the projects that would be coming out, that wouldn't have happened for probably a few months later until there's kind of a little bit more meat on the bones for the risk team to evaluate. But in this case, they were actually essentially evaluating concepts, which was incredibly helpful to then ensure that the ideas that were moving forward were essentially already scoped from a risk and legal perspective.
Yeah, so real quickly, Kellen, you've brought up the regulation a couple times here. So we all know your industry is tightly regulated. Were there any aspects of your crowdsourcing program to which you had to pay special or extra attention to be in compliance? How are you marrying those two?
Yeah, so given that our program was piloted as an internal only, I think that greatly reduced our compliance risk. I think speaking to once the ideas were potential to go to either pitch or ultimately into customers, I think those would have gone through different risk forums. And so those risk forums were the ones that the specialists who are in those risk forums, we selected a few of them to kind of peruse the ideas that were already entered. I think one of the challenges or pieces that we had to be very careful with was identifying the right stakeholders to review some of those. As you can imagine, in financial services, as many on this call probably know, the risk and regulatory folks aren't always the yes people, and sometimes they can be really quick to issue a that's never going to happen or we can't do that. And so we were really thoughtful in who we engaged or reached out to ask them to review ideas, and we really asked them to focus on what specific regulations or pieces of feedback could you provide that would help this idea move forward. And I think when you're engaging people on a broad spectrum, I think you need to be clear around like what are appropriate comments and like what is beneficial when people are engaging in these new, what could be potentially riskier ideas.
Got it. Catherine, Rebecca, anything to add there?
I think the only surprising thing for me, and I think that speaks to our senior leadership and the overall mindset shift that we're going through as an organization, is we are, traditionally a stock exchange. We are a technology provider, but the legal group and the finance group have actually been by far my most active users through the experimentation process, because they really are trying to embrace that mindset shift that while we do have regulations, we still need to be driving change and having impact for our employees and for our customers. So I think it's a very culture-specific opportunity, but don't always dismiss those trickier naysayers, because they might surprise you.
Got it. Got it. All right. Next question. We've just got a few minutes left here, but I'd like to hear from each of you how you're planning to expand or evolve your program in the coming year. You've all talked a bit about some of the successes you've had from an employee engagement standpoint, maybe new product development, sustaining development, a number of areas. I'm curious to hear where you go from here. And Kevin, if I could, I'll start with you.
Sure, Virginia. I think of two things. We used the platform this year in a little bit of a different way, and I plan to do so more in 2018, and that's around just overall business prioritization. So we will put in ideas, quote-unquote ideas, but basically just all the things, the main things we have going on as a business, and then independently, each of us on the leadership team will go through the pairwise process. And that just gives us a bit of an alignment check to see, are some of us ranking Project X number 1 and others of us are ranking it number 10? Because if so, that's a problem and we need to talk about it. So that was very successful in the times we've done it, and we plan to use that more in 2018. And then lastly, we did pilot an external challenge. It didn't go as well as we had hoped, so we plan to do that again in 2018. I think we had a lot of lessons learned on communication and engagement with customers. We had good engagement from the customers that participated, but the number of customers could have been better. So that's what we're looking to do in 2018.
Great, and it's interesting and great to hear the one about business prioritization, because recently we've worked with some clients who are leveraging the Spigit platform vis-a-vis a rapid Spigit event as part of large senior leadership strategic annual planning events. So it sounds like you did something like that to help you prioritize. That's great to hear. Rebecca, how about you in the coming months and year?
One of the use cases that we're looking to pursue is a grand challenge. So while right now we have the AlwaysOn idea room and we have individual sponsor challenges, we are looking to align the possibilities engine with a senior sponsored grand challenge that would be very transparent across the organization, with selection and pitches happening that aligns to a innovation day type conference internally. I think the big thing there is managing expectations and walking before you run. So as most of us here on the phone are talking on this webinar, it's definitely very intuitive, very easy to kind of get started, but you definitely need to set objectives and goals and then make sure that you haven't bitten off more than really the company is ready to handle.
Great advice. Great advice. Catherine, what does the coming year or 18 months look like for your program expansion?
Yep, so I think for us in 2018, we have quite a few challenges that we're looking to run. I think right now we're in trying to decide what should come first or come next. And the other thing that we're trying to think about is we've been focused on the firm-wide challenges, but now we are looking to partner with some of our product teams. For example, our insurance risk team really wants to start running some challenges that are more specific to their business unit and might require a little bit more specialization or detail. So we're working on thinking about how do you do things for particular groups in the firm versus firm-wide. But we are planning to continue to run some firm-wide challenges, particularly tied to things that we're doing in the innovation unit. So there are some technologies that we have earmarked for some development and discovery early next year. And we are going to connect some of those topics to some innovation challenges to see what other ideas the organization has that perhaps we haven't considered yet, or what are other applications that people see for this technology that maybe we haven't put enough thought into and can really build some business cases around. So we're definitely going to keep it going. I think we have a short list of about 7 or 8 that we're looking to do next year. We'll see if we're able to pull it off, do all 8. But yeah, definitely looking forward to kind of mixing it up between AlwaysOn, time-bound, and of course firm-wide, and targeting the more specific needs of some of our product teams.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. We love to see that you've got challenge pipelines underway, and you're looking at different ways to expand your program and leverage the platform that will keep your success going and ensure engagement. So that's really great. Kellen, anything to add in terms of where you all are headed in the coming year?
Yeah, so I think much the same as the other panelists have already mentioned. I think one other piece that we're looking, as we're starting to think about new groups, we're going to be very intentional in capturing best practices that the different teams have used and consolidating that into essentially an online digital guide to enable new teams to set up their own challenges essentially by themselves from scratch. And so we'll be piloting that in Q1 and then looking to roll that out more broadly as we go throughout the year.
Great. Well, to the panel, as these things normally go, time runs out and there never seems to be enough time, but Kevin McMahon at Genworth Mortgage, Rebecca Cameron at NASDAQ, Catherine Curtin, Moody Analytics, and Kellen Bell at Capital One Labs. I really want to thank you all for being great Spigit clients and taking a time out of your day to participate on our panel and share your learnings and your successes and where you're headed. We appreciate it very much. And
it's been a pleasure.
And to our audience, thank you. A recording of this webinar will be made available to you in the coming days, and we appreciate the audience participation and wish everyone a good rest of the day. Thank you so much.